Welcome to another edition of Biblical Errancy Commentary, the series that takes a critical look at Scripture, pointing out its numerous errors, contradictions, and fallacies. This program teaches a kind of Sunday school in reverse by giving you the biblical information that you should have heard but didn't. With millions of Americans hearing a totally one-sided presentation of the Bible, balance is greatly needed. Only when people are given both sides of an issue can a truly objective analysis be possible. And here to provide the alternative perspective is the editor of Biblical Errancy Newsletter, Mr. Dennis McKenzie.
Welcome to the 68th edition of Biblical Errancy Commentary. We're pleased you joined us. This is the fourth and final program in our series on salvation. So far, we've discussed faith, works, grace, whim, and predestination, all of which brings us to our final path, annihilationism. A final outcome that can be easily supported by biblical verses, but does not belong among the five means by which one can be saved, is annihilationism. The belief that there's no salvation for anyone or anything. There's no sense in worrying about works versus faith versus predestination versus grace and so forth, because no one's going anywhere except to oblivion. This was put at the end of our monologue because it abolishes salvation. The most powerful verses in support of annihilationism are the following. Ecclesiastes 9:5 says, "For the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything, neither have they any more a reward, for the memory of them is forgotten." Unquote. The strongest passage is Ecclesiastes 3:19-21, which says, quote, "For that which befalls the sons of men befalls beasts. Even one thing befalls them. As one dies, so dies the other. Yea, they all have one breath, so that man hath no preeminence over the beast. For all is vanity. All go to one place, all are of the dust, and all turn to the dust again. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward, and the spirit of the beast goes downward to the earth?" Unquote. That's about as definite as one can be. If this passage is true, then all roads to salvation are worthless. If man has no preeminence, then all efforts to improve one's standing in a world to come are a waste of time. On page 343 in a book entitled Dr. Rice, Here Is My Question, apologist John R. Rice is asked if animals have an afterlife. In response, he says, quote, "I believe that the Bible is clear that animals do not have an immortal soul in the same sense that people do. They are not made in the image of God. They have no life after death. There's nothing in the Bible about animals being redeemed." Unquote. Obviously, Rice conveniently ignored Ecclesiastes 3:19-21, which shows man is no better off. Animals are going wherever humanity is going. And if animals have no life after death, then man doesn't either. Ecclesiastes clearly states that man has no preeminence and all go to one place. If animals only go down to the dust, but man can go to heaven, then man does have preeminence over the beasts. That would mean there were two places, not one, and one thing does not befall them all. To make a short story shorter, annihilationism can be supported biblically. All but destroys any hope of salvation for anyone and makes all relevant discussions useless and worthless. That completes our analysis of the muddled and contradictory biblical roads to salvation. We can clearly see that from all we have revealed, that not only is the road to salvation vague and conflicting, but that which faces those who travel its winding path is contradictory, unfair, and arbitrary. There's no definite biblical answer to this entire issue, and all biblicists who allege otherwise are only wishing there was one. We have now come to a closely related topic that is near and dear to the hearts of all Christians. From a biblical and theological perspective, what is the most important goal of nearly all believers? To what end are their efforts directed? In other words, what's it all for? In a nutshell, according to biblicists, it's to save people from hell and for heaven. Jesus is only a means to that end. He's not the end in itself. The overriding purpose is to ferry people into that realm of eternal bliss known as heaven. As far as theology is concerned, all the preaching, all the writing, all the time, effort, and money are geared toward that one overarching, all-encompassing goal. But unfortunately, very few of heaven's pursuers have seriously considered the biblical problems associated with this concept. They haven't thought it through. Biblically speaking, 7 verses and a parable attribute qualities to heaven that range from unacceptable to utterly repulsive. For example, why would anyone want to go through the pearly gates in light of Revelations 12:7, which says, quote, "There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels," unquote. Heaven is supposed to be a perfect place, yet it had a war. How could there have been a war in a perfect place? And if it happened before, why couldn't it happen again? Why would anyone want to go to a region in which war can occur, when that's precisely what most people are trying to get away from? Moreover, everyone in heaven must be perfect. So how could a war have occurred to start with? On page 177 in the book entitled "I'm Glad You Asked," apologists Boa and Moody correctly state, quote, "If God allowed imperfect people into heaven, then heaven would no longer be perfect. Heaven is without suffering and sin, not just a place where there is little or minimal suffering and sin. For heaven would soon look like earth if imperfect people were allowed in. A system that demands less than perfection must allow some evil, and therefore must ask God to approve of this evil," unquote. Very true. So how could heaven have had a war? Other verses are equally crucial. Matthew 11:12 says, "From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers, and the violent take it by force." Suffering, violence, and force in a perfect place? Revelations 19:14 says, "The armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses." Armies in heaven? The whole place sounds like a war zone. Matthew 11:11 says, "He that is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." How can heaven, the perfect place, have inequality, levels of status, and classes? How can someone be least in heaven?